Welcome back to the Dimension Approach. My name is Geoff Blanton. Thanks for listening. A few weeks back, I tried releasing a version of my story, or started to, and I was doing it in installments. And as I was working on that, I kind of realized I wanted to release it as one piece. I didn't really like the kind of cliffhangers, wanted to kind of have a beginning and end all in one thing, so you can kind of hear what I went through and some of the work that I did. So New Year's 2011, I went to a spiritual retreat, had a spiritual awakening, kind of resulted in a spiritual emergency. So after some time being hospitalized and stabilized medicinally, started working with Lance, and we've been working together for 10 years. This is a story about that experience and our work together. Thanks for listening.
Geoff Blanton in studio.
Yeah, back in. That Child and Dragon thing was when I was last here, right? The one we just published.
Well, yes.
Because it
where
ended
I told my little story.
Your little experience of inescapable pain and suffering.
Yes.
Just the little. It was a good story. It just wasn't a little story. That's all. Where
I achieved awakening by completely failing in life.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. That is one route, I'm pretty sure. You have to absolutely fail and believe you failed.
Yes. Feel horribly shameful about it.
And accept that it's all over.
Yeah. Just accept that you totally suck.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, I don't suck.
No, you still suck.
No.
No?
You can suck and not suck at the same time. No, yeah, all that's still there. But it's...
You just suck 2 inches off the ground. As Suzuki would say.
Right.
Which Geoff just told me a couple minutes before we hit record.
Yeah, we were talking about... it was an Alan Watts. I can't remember if it's a book or a recording, because there's just... That dude must have talked constantly, because YouTube is just hours and hours of Alan Watts speeches or lectures. But he was talking about the Zen master Suzuki. And the context was talking about Satori's or awakening experiences. And somebody asked Suzuki, well, what is a Satori? And he's like, Satori is just life 2 inches off the ground. And it just made me think that. Right? It just made me think that there's all of these... Because you were talking about other gurus, what kind of led me to that?
Yeah.
Other people professing enlightenment, professing awakening. I think that sometimes what I see is people get stuck at a certain identification with the awakening experience.
Yes.
And that disconnects them from the life part, and they stick in the 2 inches above the ground part. And everything goes wrong after that. Not really. They may continue. You'll continue to have insights. You'll continue to have a different perspective on everything, and it will always be unconsciously colored by the life part that you've disassociated from.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's starting to seem more and more like to me, is that the difference between what you're trying to do and what other paths towards consciousness, other paths towards awakening is the going back in part, the outward and the inward arc. And you can get stuck at any point along that. And it's kind of the delusion that there's some destination, and that the destination isn't always present and always being reevaluated by new conscious awareness. It just feels that you could leave your life behind and live in that. It's possible, and I think that's what people are doing. But I don't think it's integrating anything. It's just trying to look from there and not from your own personal experience even. And so I think that's when you talk about wanting to do some kind of retreat, wanting to do some kind of group work, it's what's the context for that sets people up to stay in themselves enough to do the continued work. Because I think you can get people together and have a giant state experience And I don't know if that's productive. And it's one of the things I wanted to like talk about today as far as like what I've been through. How do you create the right container for that? There's a whole bunch of different levels of truth to this. And it's not that like going to a retreat and having a state experience is bad. I just think that there's got to be a better way to do it. There's got to be some way to teach this that's like creates the appropriate container for what the experience is going to be.
And the appropriate container afterward.
Right.
Is so important.
Right. I just like personally like see the biggest risk as what the ego is going to try to claim as self in that experience. The tendency to claim state experiences as self, I think, is what leads to what I'm talking about, where you abandon life for the 2 inches above the ground. It's how do you impart the danger of not being able to see the difference between those two. Consciousness is so powerful that you want to be it. Like ego wants to act like consciousness acts.
Yeah.
And it can't. But it will get overpowered by it. And like in an attempt to control it, an attempt to take all of possibility and think that it's coming from within, and then warp truth from that. I'm not sure yet how you do what I'm talking about, but that's the risk I see. And I'm sure you've run into it. I'm sure just working with people you've seen. Yeah, I'd just be curious how you've managed that.
It's a good question or interesting thought. People have experiences in session with me where they feel they state shift, they're in touch with consciousness, they sense it, we talk about it, we do these various things, go into various states, and then the common thing is they say when they leave here they can't find it.
Yeah, okay.
There hasn't been much in the way of people going and then staying in it. There's just this one client that did that.
It was before though. But I think
that wasn't induced by me.
It was important, and I want to tell that story today. But
yeah. Wait, are we doing that today?
Yeah, if we could.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about it. That's the frustrating truth of what you do, I think. The container I'm talking about, you create in a session. Like that's just a fact. And eventually people will be able to do that thing you're talking about and find it for themselves. Like that will eventually happen. And the container you create for it along the way facilitates that. And you build a conceptual framework as you're going. And it's growing into it. It's not shooting up into it.
Yeah.
The difference, so this retreat I went to, this integral spiritual experience.
Here it comes, folks.
Yeah, this is it.
Jeff's going to tell his story.
I brought notes because I had to go back and look at, they had like a sizzle reel from the retreat. So I went back and watched that. I was like, oh yeah, that happened. And
you looked at what?
Sizzle reel is like a highlight reel.
Oh.
It's just a term for,
okay.
Like we do them for conferences, like to show, people walking around and talking to each other and people presenting on stage and
right.
music playing. And that's a sizzle reel. So I went and watched that for the thing I went to. And it seemed much more innocuous than I remembered it. But so is this retreat in Monterey. It was called the Integral Spiritual Experience. I think it was the second time they'd done it. It was going to be part of a series of retreats once a year. It was over New Year's, like 2010, 2011. And my parents had invited me to go with them. And I remember that I went there looking for a spiritual practice because I was a couple years out of college then. And generally just not up to much, just, living with a bunch of friends of mine, having a good time. And I was like, well, it'd be good. It's like, there's a lot of people here teaching a lot of different methodologies. I'll learn a new practice. So I go and they have this, first I got really drunk the night before and missed my flight and had to take another flight to get out there. So So that's how it started. But I get on the next flight. It's not a big deal. I get out to San Francisco, meet up with my parents, and we go down to the retreat. And the whole thing was built around this idea of the theme for the event was the future of love was what this event was called. And most of it was built around this idea from this guy named Mark Goffney, who we'll come back to him later. This idea, it's from he's Judaic mysticism called the Kabbalah.
Yeah.
He's like a scholar of that.
Okay.
So this idea of submission, separation, sweetness being the trend of love. So like when you can look at it in terms of relationship, like you're in love with someone and you're kind of infatuated, and then you kind of separate to an extent because you begin to see how you're different. You stop identifying in the same way. You disidentify, and then you come back together with a different level of togetherness that still acknowledges the separateness. So like we were talking about, it's a model for non-duality. It's a model for psychological development. It's a model for relationships. It's a lot of things get tied into it.
Yeah.
A manic number of things get tied into it. So this idea for me, I got obsessed about, and like it kind of went to the extreme of like I was relating that trend to like every single thought I had. It's like, oh, I'm in love with this idea. Oh, it's not that great. Oh no, it was a great idea. And like that's what was going on. But while I'm there, just lots of great like experiences, lots of conscious shocks, lots of new ideas I've never felt, lots of new feelings. Just a general, whenever, I think up to that point in my life, whenever I was in a group like that, it's kind of an elevated feeling anyway. Like a bunch of people focused on one thing, you feel that energy. It's very possessing. It's very, it moves you. And I remember leaving there, I kind of like had a notebook with me, and I just started writing a lot and writing about things I was thinking, writing about this theme, relating it back to just whatever I'm thinking about. And it just kind of, I get back from the retreat. I'm back in Minneapolis, telling all my friends about it. Think it's really great. Continue writing. One thing I like looked up, the week before I go on that retreat, like my calendar is empty. And the week after, I just made like blocks of time in my Google Calendar for everything. Like it's just like, here's my day, and like here's what I'm going to do every minute of every day. And then I'm having lots of weird experiences. Like I've had this experience where I went skiing, and like we took a break for lunch, and I had to like go sit in a corner because I was like feeling all this energy. And I don't know if this was Kundalini or what, but it definitely felt like it was all up and down my back. And like I just am going through this thing where I'm like deconstructing who I am in a way. So I'm like starting with like, I am such and such, and like just having different descriptors attached to that, and get back and back and back until like I'm just like saying like I am, and like just the energy from that was just like vibrating up and down me, and like I just explode in laughter. And like because I tried to say like I was like, that doesn't make any sense, like you have to have a verb. And I was like, I am, and I'm just like just so that all sounds like neat if you're having that experience in isolation. But I'm in this ski chalet in the lunchroom in the corner, and it wasn't a busy day, thankfully. And my friends are there eating lunch, and I'm fucking losing my mind.
And this is after the retreat?
Like, after the retreat.
Like a week later or something?
Yeah, within a week, because it didn't take long. Yeah. So, but I'm also like, I'm at work. I'm doing some of the best work I've ever done. Like I was an audio engineer working at the Varsity. And I just remember I did this show, and it just like went awesome. And like people were coming up to me, telling me how great it sounded. Just like, it was super fun. Just having a great time, getting lots of reinforcement that I should keep riding this high. So, and then I keep, I'm having like conversations with people. Like there's like people that are like really digging like my new attitude, like want to like talk to me about it. There's like people at work, and my friends I think were freaked out. But I just remember like there was just this energy in my body I'd never felt before. And there would just be times when I just remember this one, somebody was over at the house, and like I just like moved my body in this way, And she was like a dancer, and she's like, I've never seen you move like that. And I'm like, yeah, I just got this energy in me. And like, I remember like I would look at my arm, and like, I can't do it now, but there was like so much energy. My arm would just like shake if I like put it out.
And wait, how did you move? Can you describe that?
I mean, I just like shook my body. It was like a dance move, but I was just like shook my body in a way. And she was like, that's awesome. And I was like, yeah, it is. And then it just kind of like took this turn where like I had to confess everything wrong I'd ever done, like this, just like obsessively and like honestly destructively, in a way that like I still grieve, that I kind of, because there's experiences you have to wrangle with yourself, and bringing them to other people is not always the most appropriate response to that surge of emotion or feeling.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. So I did that.
And did you feel, was it shame that you felt, or what was the impetus for needing to do that?
It felt like the way to make the world right.
Okay.
Because I felt like I could personally do that, though. So this is where like this boundary between ego and consciousness becomes risky and fraught with decisions that do not line up with the people around you.
Right.
So,
but it was like the Christian confess your sins.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're saying bad idea.
Bad idea. Let's say you have an awakening experience and you're like, oh, I've done some terrible shit. True. Also true before the awakening experience. Doesn't mean it's anybody else's business right now.
Got it.
Yeah. Tips and tricks for spiritual emergencies.
Yes.
Continue writing obsessively. Takes this turn where it starts to get delusional. At the same time, it's also getting a little paranoid. So I'm writing. I start worrying that people are going to find my writing and like use it against me. Start feeling like I am imbuing other people with this. It went from personal to projected, and just start saying weirder things. Go on this like date with somebody, and just it was awful. Just again like this. There's stuff that I brought into relationship with other people that was just, if you bring like manic delusion to that, it's just very harmful. So there is a way in which I couldn't wrangle the feelings I was having, and then brought that into interactions with other people. And I didn't know where they were coming from. So it kind of, you relate it to whatever you think that would mean. So if you're feeling this love that's like so strong, it like makes your body shake, makes you laugh, makes you do all these things. If you don't know where that's from or what it is or how to integrate it, you're going to translate it to whatever you think that love would mean. So that might mean dating, sex, marriage. It might mean it's just, you think it has to be an interpersonal relationship that receives that love, receives that energy. So shortly after that, I'm convinced I have to go to Canada. And like, again, delusions are strong.
Why Canada?
There's a girl in Canada that I had met at this retreat. I was like, I'm going to go to Canada. And we weren't even like talking. Like we had talked at the thing, like we had like had a lot of friendly interactions at this conference. But I was like, oh, I'm just going to go there. Well, I guess initially, at first I thought I needed to go to Colorado and like meet up with these integral people. So I told my dad, I'm like, all right, I'm going to get in the car. I'm going to go to Colorado. And he's like, don't go to Colorado.
Was he thinking, okay, Geoff's having a manic?
I don't know. I don't think they knew until I'll get to there when it became very clear.
Okay.
But I don't think he knew, because there's also all this other good stuff going on, and I'm having like, there's a lot of positive insight into my own life experience. There's a lot of things going on, but it's just all at once, all the time. So this delusion I started experiencing, where I feel I have to go to Canada. I just like go out, and it's like January in Minnesota, and I'm just like out in the streets trying to get to the airport via bus. But I don't have my phone with me. No, I do have my phone with me. But at this point, like it's full blown mania that I'm experiencing. And I remember like trying to give my phone away. I remember just trying to figure out what bus is going to get me there, which is like, it's not easy to get to the airport on bus from Uptown. That's a very complicated route. I was not up to figuring that out. So I was never going to make it to the airport. But eventually, like my dad's talking to me and he tells me to get off the bus, and like I go into a restaurant and just sit down. My friends find me.
And your dad was in Mississippi.
In Mississippi, yeah.
Your friends find you. Did he like call your friends?
Yeah. He called my friends and
go get you.
And they went and got me. So we're in the car, and my dad had talked to psychiatrist friends of theirs, and he knew he's having a manic episode. He just needs to go to the hospital. And he's like, at the time, I think he told him to take me to a university hospital because they just deal with mania a lot more because this kind of stuff pops up in people's early 20s. But we end up going to HCMC. I have to admit myself, because I'm not, as far as these things work, for people who don't know.
Yeah.
You have to be a danger to yourself or others to be admitted by a third party. I wasn't, so I had to admit myself.
Right.
So it's here where the delusion carried me into the hospital, because I felt that in order to do this next thing I wanted to do, I just needed to go to the hospital. So
so you got on board with it?
Yeah, I got on board with it. I remember being in the waiting room, and I thought it was, very late at night. I just thought the lights were absurdly bright. And I was like, and this again with mania, what's so tricky about it is you are hypersensitive to everything.
Yeah.
Like your physical senses are at like a 20 all the time. So what that leads to, which kind of foments the mania, is you see synchronicities in everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, there are synchronicities in life. It's a powerful experience. If you have them over everything, it's overwhelming. So I'm in, and now I bring that up because I'm in that lobby and the lights are really bright. I've been back to that lobby since. It is the dimmest, most calm room I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. You can barely see in there. It's so dark. And I just was like looking at the light, and it was just like the sun was in that room. That's an exaggeration. It just seemed like really bright fluorescent lighting. I know it's not.
Let me just, as far as the timeline on this, so you were at this retreat, this integral retreat, and maybe we can come back to this, but because I want to ask, like, what do you feel like caused the shift, blah, blah, blah. But we can come back to that. But I just wanted to, just as far as timeline, so you're at this retreat, you leave the retreat, and over the next couple of weeks, you start, like, just stuff starts changing. Energy starts running, and
I think it started there, but then it just keeps going. Yeah.
And so your mind, it just sort of like drinking or something. It's like after one drink, you felt a certain way, and after two, and after 10, like suddenly you were just more. Like gone.
Yeah, right.
And then started behaving like at first it seemed like this really good thing.
Yeah.
But it just kept escalating.
Right.
To where, okay, now your behavior started to not be.
For sure. And I think like personally, like I have a tendency to binge.
Okay.
Like that's just something, and I'm more aware of it now. I don't do it like I used to, but I definitely binge. Like that's in me. So it kind of, I think I binged on whatever I could do to keep that feeling going.
Yeah. From the retreat to when you're going into the hospital, how long was that? A couple weeks?
Yeah, just a couple, not even 2 weeks, I don't think.
Okay.
Maybe, at most 2 weeks.
Okay. And so your friends take you to the hospital.
Yeah.
And your dad suggested that, and you said a psychiatrist suggested it.
Yeah. And
then were your friends like, oh yeah, he needs to go to the hospital?
I think they saw me and heard me talking.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah. And I'm kind of fighting them at times. They're pretty insistent. My friend, was one of my best friends to this day. Like, yeah, it's.
And you were saying stuff that was what? Like,
I mean, I'm just telling them like the trip I'm on, like I got to go to Canada. And they're like, no. They're like, why? Like, what do you? And then I think I don't remember specifically what I said, but I know it was obvious that
And were you sort of happy and docile? Were you aggressive?
I was like half laughing, half weeping, afraid of the hospital and what that meant. So I think I was not combative, but definitely resistant to that. Yeah.
And did you feel like loving through all of it? Did you feel superior? Did you feel
No, I didn't
angry?
feel superior. I felt very loving. I mean, it just felt, it's kind of a oneness with all, like, it's like it wasn't oneness, but I didn't distrust anyone.
Okay.
I wasn't sure why I needed to go to the hospital, and that was scary.
Yeah.
And I think like that part of me definitely, yeah. I don't know what I would have been if I hadn't like convinced myself that going to the hospital would further this delusion. I convinced myself that was necessary.
Okay.
To go in. And I mean, it helped that they were just there telling me like, I think it's going to be good. And they definitely helped me get there in a really important way. Because, there was no other recourse at that point.
Yeah.
There was no other, I don't know. Oh, I don't know. I don't think there's ever a coming down without medication at that point. Like it's tough. Like knowing what I know now, if like some group of people who was very in tune with what I was going through had been around me at that time, maybe I could have come down and integrate some of it instead of just taking off. But that wasn't there. And so what was there was going to the hospital.
Does this girl in Canada know how close she was to getting a visit from you?
Never talked to her ever. No, I never talked to her ever again. I remember I had enough money for a ticket. I did not have much money at all, but I could have gotten a ticket.
Did you have her address?
No.
Just Canada.
Yeah,
Destination Canada.
Mania, man. It's a hell of a drug.
The hospital experience.
Yeah. So, again, if you don't know, if you get admitted to the hospital, you're there for at least 72 hours, and to be checked out by a psychiatrist and to be under observation. So I'm there. I remember just lots of, it was intense. It's an intense place to be anytime. If you're hypersensitive to what's going on around you, it's even weirder. My delusions continued the entire time because there's so many different things to talk about as far as like medication and things. But I remember like when I first got there, I was trying to talk to everyone there who was in the psych ward. So I remember like my roommate had some book it was about, was it The Rapture? What's that book series? You remember Left Behind? Do you remember the Left Behind series? It was one of those. I threw it in the trash. I was like, because I didn't know, that I'm just being like overcome by memories. Not in like I can't talk about it, but I'm like, I have so many things I want to talk about. So I remember the Left Behind
You're
book.
like, Lance, I got to go to Canada.
Lance, I'm packing up my bag.
Oh, yeah.
No. So the other thing about being manic, and I think this also goes along with different awakening states, is living in metaphor. Is like everything is a metaphor. And what's tough is like that is true on a certain level.
Yeah.
Like you can live in that zone and you'll see different things that you mean by the things you say, things that other people mean by the things they say. It's very difficult to decipher. It's not like something that you want to be in all the time. But when you're manic, you're there.
Yeah.
So there's a Left Behind book, and I'm like, the rapture's bullshit. I'm going to throw this in the trash. And then like my roommate understandably was very upset. And he's like, get it out of the trash. And I was like, and to me, that was a metaphor for like having to deal with the idea of the rapture. And it's like, fine, I'll take it out of the trash. It's very, there were like things in the room that were left by previous people that I saw as like symbols for people I knew in my life. There were other people in the ward that like I would project people I knew onto them and like thought that like they represented people in my own life that were suffering. The whole experience of being there, like for the first few nights, like all I did was sweat. Like all night I would just sweat. because they would give me medicine to sleep because I couldn't sleep at this point. Even leading up to it, that's another thing. Like I was sleeping less a lot leading up to going to the hospital. But when I'm there, I would like, because they give you scrubs to wear, because when you come in, you only have like one set of clothes. So they give you scrubs to wear and like get clean and stuff. But I would sweat through them for like the first 3 nights. And like I would like walk out in the middle of the night and be like, hey, I need some new scrubs. But then the paranoia continued. I thought I was being observed all the time, which is weird because you are. But like I thought people were like watching me and hearing my thoughts and all this stuff. My friends came to visit me a lot while I was there. It's to this day, pretty amazing to me because there's no reference there for who you are or what's real when you're in this alien environment with people you've never met. I remember the food was really good. Really. But again, you're talking to psychiatrists. They're trying to figure out what's going on with you. I think they're trying really hard. They're trying to understand what's happened to you, because I'm not saying things that line up with their experience of mania.
You didn't get dragged into the hospital against your will.
Well, I mean, yes and no, right? Like I kind of convinced myself that this delusion carried me through. I thought it was necessary, but like I was worried about it. I didn't know why in the moment too. So you kind of have these different perspectives on the same experience, even while you're having it. So you're like, why are they taking me to the hospital? I have to go to the hospital to do this next thing I manically think is true as part of this delusion about whatever was next. Mm-hmm. Or, you're talking to psychiatrists and psych nurses every day. You're talking to people every day, just like in the psych ward. I was kind of confused by that. I just thought that I think I generally felt like people were trying to help me, but it was hard I couldn't relate to them. I didn't really know on one level what was really going on. So I didn't know who people were or what they were doing there really. And it's tough because like people would come to see me and I was just still in this delusional state. So it was I imagine it was hard for them. It's hard for me to look back on and remember like how I interacted with people then. It still wasn't real in that way. Like I was still convinced of some delusion. And so relating to them from there more than like from any kind of like reality.
Right.
So I think that was like something you defined as like, that helped me. It was like what psychosis is. That psychosis is just an experience that doesn't line up with people's kind of agreed upon reality. Mm-hmm. And so that was helpful to me because like that's true and it doesn't feel as damning as like you're insane or you're crazy. It's just you're having an experience that doesn't line up with other people's experience. So it was hard to get out and remember all those things. But that's kind of what was going on while I was there. And I was still writing a lot while I was in there. I don't remember what. I think I like threw all that away at some point. But like, but it is another nice thing about the psych ward is they have lots of pads of paper and pens they'll give you whenever you want to write, which I thought they've obviously dealt with this before. So they were.
And the stream of information that was coming felt like insights about life, love.
Yeah. And just felt, and there's also like so there's that, and then there's like, you feel like psychic, because you're just projecting everything onto everyone all the time. Mm-hmm. So you're creating this delusional narrative that everything fits into. So you feel kind of all powerful. You feel all encompassing. Mm-hmm. And then there's like the coming down from that. So eventually my parents come up and I think about 11 days in, and I'm kind of like released to their care. But I probably should have stayed a little longer. I don't know, but I was definitely still delusional when I left, but kind of kept taking the medication and gradually came down.
What was that like?
Coming down?
Yeah.
Terrible. It was, cause it's a crash. It's like as fast as I went up, which was over a couple of weeks, you come down that fast too on these medications. It takes about a couple of weeks, but so like there's coming down from like the real part of it, and there's coming down from the delusional part of it, the psychotic part of it, and you kind of have to crash down out of all of those. And so that was really tough. And it's like you're kind of thankful and like sad at the same time, because as you begin to see like how psychotic it had gotten, how manic I was, how much of what I was thinking and feeling wasn't real. It's like, well, thank goodness I don't feel that way, and oh my God, I felt that way, and like I said those things, and damn, it kind of sucks now. I'm pretty sad that I don't feel that way anymore. And then you're kind of left wondering what was real. And I think that's something that I wondered for a long time. It's tough because, I mean, that whole story is kind of a setup to like working with you, which like I have a lot of things to say about that too. And like, it's also, I mean, so you get medicated, you crash, and then you go into a very intense depressive cycle. And in that, again, losing your identity while manic is exciting, and losing it while you're depressed is debilitating. So it was like months before I could work again, months before I had any sense of like self, it seemed. To me, it seemed that dramatic, but hard to connect to anything when you're in that state, hard to see the point, to motivate yourself. It's hard to show up and be doing anything, be with anyone, be present, be talking like yourself, be hard to be awake in that state. When I got out, my parents through the Integral Network were able to find you and David. I talked to David, Dr. Thompson, who told me he could tell I was still manic. So he's like, you need to get back into partial hospitalization. So I did that. And he's like,
over the phone, he said that?
Yeah. He didn't say you're still manic. He's like, I think you need to get back into partial hospitalization. I was like, cool, whatever you say, doc. And then, and he's like, and then he said, but I have somebody who I work with that I think you should talk to. So I think I started partial hospitalization. And I can't remember if it was that week or the week after I came in to meet with you. But I know before I met with you, I found out that they had diagnosed me as bipolar.
Yeah.
And I was just, if you haven't ever received a mental health diagnosis, it sucks. And it's very hard to label human experience in that way. And it wasn't even like told to me actively. It was like on a form that I was having to fill out, or like some worksheet I was doing in partial hospitalization. And it's like, Geoff Blanton, bipolar. I was like, this is how you tell me? Like, what the fuck is this?
Really?
Yeah. That sucked. Because I had just predicted the Super Bowl winner, like the weekend before. So I'm like, how can I be bipolar? I'm psychic. I flipped a quarter. No. So then I come to see you, and the first thing you tell me is like, what happened to you is real, or in that first session, and I don't think you're bipolar. So it was like, that was really important to me. And there isn't, and this is why I want to do this podcast, there isn't validation for these experiences. And they are so far out of the realm of anything normal. And there is no cultural validation for it where we are. And it's been a problem for 80 years since we've started going down this Western psychological kick, I think, is that we're studying things that people have known forever and like terming them, and not maintaining some connection to all the experience that's still outside of what we've given terms to. So then I start, I remember I was coming like twice a week at the beginning, and it was like such a relief, because it's just, again, I was on these meds. If you've ever been on, what are they called? Psychoactive medications, or it takes a long time to sort it out. It takes a long time to find the right dose. And the immediate effect is what they call zombification, which is just the flattest affect. Like you just can't, it's like there's nothing. It's like no one's home. So you go in, you tell them that, they give you less, and then you just keep doing that. So I'm going through all that. At the same time, I'm working with you twice a week. And I remember at some point I was talking to a psychiatrist, and I was like, yeah, I'm seeing a therapist. He's like, how often are you going? I was like, oh, twice a week. He's like, oh, Jesus Christ. I was like, but it's helping. Like, what do you mean? so we start working together, and there was there's been a lot of experiences over the long, like we've been working together for a really long time. So one was just that telling me that you didn't think I was bipolar was great, because it's kind of like I could give people an explanation that the hospital gave me to be like, hey, this is what I'm going through. And then like for myself, I could know that like, I don't think that's really true, but then they won't ask me any more questions, because I went through all this stuff really publicly. And I think that's something I was talking to Sky about recently, is that it was tough to have something that's so hard to understand happen to you in front of so many people. And then for someone who generally fears being misunderstood to experience that and then kind of feel unable to explain it forever, at least in the way that would feel validating. So that was kind of the importance of being able to come to you and talk to you about it. And then there's another thing that I think made a big shift as far as like starting to feel myself again, was this thing you did. You would kind of say I would be stuck in my throat from a very early point. And you did something where you like touched some different points, and like I immediately dropped down into my stomach for like the first time in my life being aware of it. But it's like the world went from 2D to 3D. And I think that was a big shift for me, to be able to like get back into my body to some extent, because I was so shut off in my head. And then years of work. I remember something that happened in the last couple of years, like three or 4 years ago. You asked me to like shift my attention to like what was going on with you. And this is like 6 or 7 years into therapy. I had never once thought about what was going on in you. I'm not afraid to admit it. And like I did that, and like I picked up something, and I was like, oh fuck. And then like for 3 days I was just like feeling what everyone else was feeling. And I've kind of been sorting through that ever since. And that's gotten better recently. And then I remember it was an experience I had. I was like out in Nashville, and for a buddy's bachelor party. And we were at this bar, and like all of a sudden, all of my presuppositions about other people fell away. I just read this book on Adler, on Adlerian psychology, and his whole idea of comrades, and that just viewing other people as comrades instead of opposition. And like that just went away. And like that lasted for a couple of days or whatever, but it's pretty neat. So there continue to be these different state experiences that kind of remain in some regards, remain depending on what the context is. Some go away, but more and more able to differentiate those and see the dimensions in which they're true, or the dimensions in which I experience them, and like the context I'm coming from when I do and do not experience them. And just kind of feels like more and more of what we've been working on for so long, I'm beginning to integrate. And I think that's been a pretty profound shift just even in this year. And I think working on this podcast has been huge for me. Like it's something that like I love talking about. I love talking to you about. I love hearing what you have to say about pretty much anything. And getting to, again, it's like building this conceptual framework for the experience of life, that to be able to interpret it and see it and experience it more viscerally, and at the same time from 2 inches above it, right? That's kind of the story of how I ended up working with you and getting to here.
And what was 2010?
2010, New Year's 2010, 2011.
And so you would
have been like February 2011.
Yeah. What are you feeling at the moment?
I mean, I felt I couldn't have done this until the last couple months. Like it feels like more a part of me than it did. I don't feel as afraid of it as I used to be. So it's fun to like recap with you, because you've been through all that with me. Not the part leading up to meeting you, but you've heard a lot about it. I think like I remember last year we were visiting my cousins, and I talked a little bit about it, and then like my body just shook the whole time. And like everyone in the room felt cold. And it wasn't because they're just wonderful people, and they were really listening and really interested, and it all felt good to talk about. And at the same time, like my body just like would not stop shaking. And I don't feel that to the same extent anymore. And it's not because I'm disconnected from it. I just feel safer in it. That it just is what happened, and it is part of who I am and what I've been through. But even 6 months ago, I don't know if I could have talked. It's just something clicked.
As I've said all along, and it's happening now as you're talking about it, but I feel the transmission, or a transmission, which, the idea of transmission is not a very well known or understood or talked about thing, obviously, in our culture. But I feel affected by a certain, it's like there's a vibratory frequency, there's a type of consciousness which is activating, which as far as activating it, like the idea of a psychoactive substance. So if we're sitting here, if you had given me coffee and there was whiskey in it or something, and I start on my third cup
Should I smell it?
Coffee, I started noticing like, hey, is there something in this coffee? Because like I'm feeling,
Yeah.
You start feeling high or you start feeling altered, right? And so I feel that as you're talking about this. I feel it in general around you, but certainly as we're talking about it and really focusing on it, it's heightened. I feel it hitting a place in my head that, as far as the location, it would be, roughly where the pineal gland is, although for some reason I feel it right in front of that.
Where is that?
It like right in the center of your head, basically.
Okay.
If you try to figure out what like dead center between your temples and between the nose and the base of the skull, I feel it in front of that, and it has always felt somewhat mental, meaning there's certainly a feeling to it.
Yeah.
That's a very soft, loving feeling, but it hits my head, and my sense is I'm experiencing what you experienced or continue to experience, where it's like this certain energy center in my head is suddenly like very high, like if I smoke pot or something, and it makes me feel weepy, and a lot of the stuff you described, meaning I can feel the tendency, like mentally I could get carried away with it.
Me too.
And I don't know what that would lead to, except it seems similar to what you've talked about, where that feeling that, okay, I'm cracking the code.
And I think that's the identification with it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think from a self-preservation standpoint, I had to disidentify with for a while.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
Yeah. I remember a lot of our work was like, you had made this shift to where, okay, you were now being this and not that.
Yeah.
And it seemed like in every session, one of the things I was that I felt guided to do was validate that higher experience and work towards integrating it. Like the goal here isn't to make that go away or to securely lock it.
You said that a lot.
Yeah. And I understood your attempt or a desire to do that, to try to stay functional. But I remember it was like, look, this is, the first time you walked into my office, because, you hear, okay, someone's on a manic trip or a psychotic break or whatever, and you don't know what that's going to look like or feel like. And there's a lot of different versions of that, obviously.
Yeah.
But you walked in and it was like somebody just, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, just what comes to mind. It's like if you're in an elevator and the elevator suddenly sort of drops kind of a little quicker than you expected or something, and you lose your stomach a little bit.
Yeah.
Or, that kind of roller coaster. It was like that feeling suddenly happened where the vibe in the room completely changed. And it was like, oh, fuck, like, all right, this is, it was like, all right, this is the real deal. This is, he's not just like, mentally, on some little mind trip, whatever. Like there's a high vibration that's like very here and now that he's in. And it was awesome. It was this thing where it was like, I was aware you were in trouble.
Yeah.
And simultaneously I was like enjoying and benefiting from this.
I remember you told me on the way out, and like, I wasn't like, a small part of me heard it as funny, but a lot of me didn't. You're like, we'll work together and like, it's going to be all right. It's like, or we'll both go crazy.
It's hard to do it justice, and I'm sure this is always the case, but it's hard to sit here and talk about it and do justice to, it's like this epic adventure.
Yeah, right.
That is all in the psyche. And so it's like analogous to something where you like swam across the Atlantic and then, had to like hike barefoot and naked through the Himalayas and, fight off saber-toothed tigers. And
right. I mean, there was possession.
Yeah.
I remember I think it was Mark Gaffney, who has since been found to be a bit of a cult leader himself, and how he's, his whole shadow is another thing you can read about. But I just remember there was a session where you had like, it was like an exorcism. So like before I would read the stuff this guy had written, and it was like intoxicating. And like, I was just very clicked in to whatever he was putting out, which he had been all weekend at that retreat. And he was the main speaker during all that. He was like framing all of it the whole time. And we had that session, and this whole like imaginal possession piece. And then after that, what he wrote never had the same effect again. And so, I mean, I can explain that conceptually, and I can explain it from my own experience, but that is one tiger in the wilderness that had to go. But that first year was very hard. And then out of that gradually, but I would say by that fall, I was able to like work again, which was really big for me, just to get back to contracting and doing event production work. After working with, I mean, that was after a few months of like going twice a week. And I think by the next spring, I was starting to feel a little more like myself. At the same time, I went to like an integral, like just kind of talk group while I was seeing you. I think they didn't know what had happened to me, but it was a nice place to just go and sit and feel disconnected from myself and not expected to be anything else. That was really nice. Yeah, the next spring, I think I remember my friend Tim, I made a joke, and he told me afterward, he's like, "Oh, Geoff's back." And it's just because I think I'd just been gone. I mean, I was living there. Just thank God for these friends of mine. Like, I stayed and lived with them, and they were supportive. I'm sure scared of what had happened, but like continued to be my friends and continued to, just love me. And to this day, just still my best friends. And then I met my now wife, and it wasn't together enough that who knew about all this stuff.
So Geoff was this kind of crazy guy.
Well, it definitely had been through some shit, and I don't think anybody knew what the hell it was.
Yeah.
Could be crazy.
There's a bunch of different things I think would be good to talk about. But the one that was just coming to mind is, I mean, we could go on and on about the actual hospital experience, because I've never heard anyone who's been to the psych ward give a positive review of the psych ward.
I mean, the food was good. I have a lot of other things to say about it.
Okay. This thing where they medicate you and they diagnose you, and then the basic idea was, okay, that diagnosis is kind of for life, and you need to be on these meds for life, and that's just kind of it, right?
Yeah.
Like that, which is so. I mean, it's hard to know. Like, where would you be if you had just sort of,
I don't know.
accepted that?
Because I'm not on medication now. Haven't been for 9 years.
Yeah.
But I worked with a psychiatrist. Basically, what kept happening was I just kept going back saying, I still feel like a zombie. And it got to a point where the dosage was so low, it's like theoretically not even effective on like it's all based on weight, like the dosage for those types of medication. So the psychiatrist I was working with was like, you can, gradually go off of it and then just come see me if you can't sleep again. So in that way, I think the psychiatrist was pretty great and like good to work with. At least like practically speaking, just saw like if this isn't, because I'd been on a low enough dosage for a couple months that they're like, you may not need this. So
as far as the work, for example, that you and I did together, right? It's like, well, we could talk a lot about what felt helpful, and I could tell you what I thought was helpful. As far as what was the treatment approach? How do you take someone? How do you help someone?
Yeah,
from that kind of a state, and because it's not just about giving them a cup of coffee and waiting for enough hours to go by until they sober up, right? It's
right.
It was a different kind of deal, like you just said, and like you said, a big part of my understanding and experience when we were working together was okay to just leave it and crash, like you were talking about, crash back down into a different state,
just a pit,
is not the way to go. And so I was very intentional about helping to integrate that higher state.
Yeah, and it was tough. Just talking about this stuff, messing my throat. There was something that was really hard about that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it was partially the medication or like fear, because it's so much like fear after going through that and seeing like where it went to.
Yeah.
And like knowing that like functionally it can't just go doing that again.
Yeah, right.
Like that. And so there's kind of a lockdown on that.
Yeah.
That like I don't know how long it took to, I feel like that's been gradually undone and is still there to some extent. Like there's
the block is undone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There was just a real intense fear about what that would mean to open that up again.
Yeah.
Because it was very disruptive. It was very scary. It like impacted a lot of people. It's very expensive for my parents. Like I'm sure they like helped with all that.
Was there a simultaneous desire or craving to go back into it? I mean, was it like a heroin addict that?
No, I was so scared. There wasn't.
Okay.
Like I was so worried about what it would mean to do it again that I wasn't. Once I really came down, obviously like it was chasing it the whole way up. But once I actually came back down, it was like, oh my God, what just happened?
And so like right now in this moment, when you bring your conscious attention to that state.
Yeah.
Or to the memory of that state, or whatever. Is it just a memory, or do you find it?
No, I find it.
Yeah, so I can see that. And by the way, we're in person today. I don't know how much that matters.
Still here.
So that's what it looks like to me, is you literally hook up to it.
Yeah.
And then are you, like right now in the moment, are you accessing it? Meaning, are you anchoring and orienting from starting down below, but it's coming through, or are you going up and orienting and anchoring there?
It's more coming down and through right now.
Yeah, right. What happened?
Well,
immediately right away, I'm like, well, let's just.
Yeah, no. Initially, I was like, oh fuck. Like initially, it's like a very nervous.
What would happen, do you think, if you went up and anchored and oriented from up there?
I don't know. Still,
do you feel like you could?
I feel like I could try, and like it would. I'd just have to see if it would get out of hand. Like,
right.
It feels like that's more accessible than it used to be. That like option.
Right.
Like there might be some ability to just like have that experience and just be like, okay, this is that experience.
Yeah. It's similar to even like to getting drunk, right? Like you might have been all about a certain behavior when you were drunk this one time. Now, if you're going to drink again, it's not like you immediately have to go to that particular.
Right.
I want to make sure we get to what do you feel is therapeutic for you, or what do you want to have talked about, and or what do you think is important for the listeners?
Yeah.
To hear. How does any of this pertain to the dimension approach?
Well, I mean, the dimension approach was the opportunity to integrate any of it. It was a spiritual emergency that definitely had years of work around that, just as far as reestablishing a sense of self that could kind of stand in the wake of all the things that happened around it. It's because it's something that I've studied for a long time. Like I've studied spiritual experiences since I was in high school. It's something that I've even sought out at times. It took a lot bigger framework to understand what it meant afterward. And that's what I got working with you. And I think what went along with that is that any kind of therapeutic work you do opens the doors to things you didn't show up to work on. And I think that's true I think that's true probably with any therapy, but I know with a dimension approach that it's kind of the point that the presenting issue is rarely the underlying cause. Having this experience that was very, very much a oneness, communal experience that was overwhelming, the thing that's balanced it out over time, acknowledging my own separateness, that there was a way in which I was trying to relate to others without acknowledging that I was a separate self. When you asked me like what I was getting from you, or you asked me like in the session one day, like bring my awareness to you and see like what I notice, and like that was mind blowing. I think my default was a projected codependence on anyone and anything that didn't allow for two separate things,
right,
that could be related to at will.
Yeah.
And it's not all the time. It's still kind of like I can end up back in my default and then have to get back to that. That's changed a lot of things. I think it's the result of a long time of work. It'd be tough for me to say what specifically you did during that time that kind of led to that, but I know that it's a result of that work. And so that's kind of
my experience and my understanding of it. Like I said before, you came in and you were obviously experiencing a higher state, and had trouble integrating it, obviously, and we're still.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, you were experiencing a very low state, as far not low level, but a depressed state.
Yeah.
Which is an important distinction, right? You weren't finding yourself down in sort of hellish realms. It was more.
Yeah, it's just depression.
Yeah. And the idea that you need to let go of that higher thing and just learn to live from this lower thing, which I think in general, even though they don't say it that way, that was sort of the hospital's view, was like, you've come down out of that now, you're bipolar, take meds, and sort of exist at this lower state.
Find your new normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is tragic, and I think a lot of people end up staying right in that zone. And it was obvious to me that no, that higher thing needs to be a part of your psyche now. What was in the way, and I think this is often the case, was meaning what was in the way of integrating it, right? When I was looking at you, and it's like, all right, what needs to happen for you to anchor this higher state down into your 3D linear rational ego mind? And what was in the way, which is what's always in the way, was a few different things: intense aggression and death, right? Like those, it's like love, hate, and death are the three. And it's like the higher state thing, you were experiencing love, right? If you had to categorize.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's like, all right, Geoff, we got to bring in death and we got to bring in hate.
Yeah.
Which, of course, in that manic state, and you and I didn't, it wasn't a thing where we went back and forth sort of arguing about truth or the higher state. You were very much, in every session with me, you were always anchored more in the depressed ego.
Yeah.
You didn't have episodes in any sessions where you went up and were trying to like explain the higher truth to me. That, and I say that just meaning that just happened to be the case.
Yeah, it's just where I was at.
Yeah. But so it was okay when I say you got to bring in hate and death. It's because otherwise it's not real. It's a disconnect from reality if you're just going to do the love thing, right? And of course, I think ultimately the reality is love. But if you're going to anchor it down here, one of the things you got to do to anchor it is to include hate and death. And in my interactions with you, I was doing a thing that I often do where the way I put it is I was finding you. I was going up to where I saw you at and connecting to you there, and then simultaneously connecting to you, just on the 3D ego level.
Right. Which seemed like impossible to me.
Yeah.
Initially. I was like, I don't get it. I don't get how you do that.
And what are your thoughts now? Do you feel like I did indeed do that? Was that just words?
No, I think you definitely did that. I think it's just the degree to which I'm able to do it is always changing. Mm. Because it took a long time to feel even my body again. And I think part of it was like a disconnection from it that predated this episode. Mm-hmm. But then it was exacerbated by this state. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of work around that over the years.
Right. The thing one of the main things I was doing with you, which again, whether someone's in a manic state or a depressed state or even just any given condition, this idea of transference and this idea that when you allow an empathic merge, you will start to experience what the other person is refusing to experience. And so in simple terms here, you were experiencing love, you weren't experiencing the hate, and you were experiencing intense love, right? So there was intense hate. Mm-hmm. It's like the flip side of that coin was there. And so it couldn't get made conscious because you were keeping it split. Mm. So we did a lot of sessions where I would bring up this sadomasochistic spectrum, that you're being on the masochistic side, I'm being on the sadist side. And we would talk about it. And of course I was saying that ideally you'd integrate more of the sadist side.
Yeah.
And you understood that conceptually. You weren't sort of arguing with it. You were trying to understand it, trying to feel it. But aside from any words we said, for me to simply sit in an empathic merge with you and allow the aggression, allow the hate, allow the energy to move within our joint experience was helpful to you in that it helps your psyche integrate it. Yeah. It's that idea that the two people are together processing something. And as we did sessions like that, I saw you move more and more towards a stabilization. Mm. And a lot of that was nonverbal.
For sure.
It's that thing where I'm sitting there, I seem fairly calm, but I'm actually working intensely, trying to stay with and hold the energies, right?
Yeah, right.
Another aspect was the shame, right? There was so much shame.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time in that dynamic where you could tell that I seemed to be seeing this place in you that you were finding so shameful, and I didn't seem to be judging it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which you at times you said that was confusing, felt vulnerable, but it also felt good or potentially good.
It's almost like you were still the weird one.
Yeah.
To be holding that view or holding that.
Right.
Yeah.
If I was going to lay out the phases of your case, it was like you started to stabilize more and more. You just started to have more and more of a sense of being grounded and not just flying.
Yeah.
And the depression and shame seemed to gradually decrease in intensity. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, it was like your intellect came back online in a way that you started to own again, which was a huge shift. That's way better than when it wasn't online.
Yeah, right.
When you're questioning, when you're ashamed of, when you're afraid of, when you can't find your intellect, even though it's not like your intellect wasn't working, but it's like you couldn't own it in a way that was providing a stable sense of self, right?
Right.
And again, it was like, okay, what was in the way of it coming online? And again, this tends to be the case. It's like when the ego mind stays online, or when the intellect stays online, and you're going to get real high, you're going to have a real high experience. As we know, the ego mind gets overwhelmed, and then it goes in various directions. And one of the directions it goes is towards mania. It goes towards when it eventually starts to disorganize, right? It gets too, it can't maintain the coherence.
Right.
And as it disorganizes, that becomes anxiety, that becomes terror, that becomes the threat of insanity. The mind's common reaction to that is to shift into borderline and or paranoia and or primal rage. If you're going to either primal rage or primal fear. That's what I was seeing, and then I was holding a lot of that. And then this idea of sort of little by little helping your system engage that. There was a lot of time spent where it just seemed like, it was that thing where we're sitting there, and it was like if someone was sitting there watching our session, it would seem like I'm feeling aggression at you, right? You remember how that was?
Yeah. Tough to distinguish.
Right.
Yeah.
But we were able to, right? It never got to
I mean, like outwardly, if you're looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you could tell I wasn't.
Because it always seemed contained to you. And that's the part of the transference part you're talking about, is that the aggression you would display, it's almost just on me to gradually realize that that's in me.
Yes.
I mean, that's the whole mirroring thing.
Right.
That like the context of mirroring, I always appreciated because it was kind of like at your own pace that you accept whether or not that's in you.
Yeah.
And it's like conceptually from the very beginning, you're like, this is in you. And it's like, if you believe that or not, that's the case. And then gradually you begin to see that as true.
Right.
But it's not, certainly never like forced on me, or like, there was never a feeling like you have to believe this even. It was just like, this is what it is. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I would describe that.
And it's been a process, right? Like you said, all along. And it continues to be. And that's this dicey juxtaposition that everyone's in, where it's like, well, you're either stuck holding it at bay and having the symptoms of that, or you allow it to come through, but it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's hard to have that go smooth or titrate that. It generally bursts through in moments of crisis or overwhelm.
Yeah.
But my understanding from what you've said since is that you have organized that experience in a certain way where you can feel that actually that anger, that death, that separating thing, becoming aware, like you said, that you're separate, which initially your system goes into an absolute desperate fight against that.
Yeah.
But then if you lose that fight and end up on the other side, you realize it's like the best thing that could have happened. The realization of that separateness.
Yeah.
Right? It's totally deceiving.
Yeah.
Instead of you're alone now forever, or you're isolated forever, or you don't exist anymore, or you die, it's the opposite.
It's like you've always been alone and now you can actually relate to people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very paradoxical in that way.
Yeah.
Now you can actually be seen. Now you can be felt. Now you can see others and feel others.
Yeah.
In a way that prior to that,
yeah,
it seems to be a way the psyche works that you had that experience, that manic experience in 2011, early 2011, you had that experience, but then it took several years to gradually integrate and bring in these other energy. And again, that's one of the main things I feel like I was helpful with was to bring that, and it's just so different than what you get from society. Most people wouldn't have looked at the state you're in and think, okay, what we need to do is like bring aggression, into this guy's picture.
Right.
It's like most people think that doesn't even make any sense. And it doesn't mean just like be hostile at you, right? It means join you in this empathic merge.
Yeah.
And then help you integrate the split off anger, the split off hatred, the split off rage. And then it's like, okay, and then what does that do? Well, that helps you move towards death. It's like, wait a second.
So that's the next stop.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just bringing some theory stuff into this.
No, it's good. It's good.
Does that all? And I don't know if I've even put it exactly that way to you with regard to your case, but does it?
It's one of those things where I know you've said those pieces, and it just makes more sense now.
Okay.
It's just there's it's concept versus experience. There's they will never line up. I wish there would have been a way to do that faster and more easily.
Yeah.
That would have been nice.
Yes.
But
I agree.
Like if that was a psychoactive medication they could give people,
Yeah.
if they like figured that out, that would be helpful. It's like instead of just changing how the neurons interact, just like change, the levels of love, hate, and death.
Right. Right.
Get everybody dialed in.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com. Thanks again for listening to my story. It means a lot to be able to share it. I've wanted to be able to talk about it more openly, but I've had my own judgments about it over the years that I've had to work through. The whole thing was no solo endeavor. And if you're listening and you've been through something similar or know someone who has, for me, I needed a lot of people. Just the whole hospital staff, from admitting to inpatient, outpatient hospitalization, day treatment, office consultations. It's a wild world in there. But everyone really worked hard to put up some guide rails for me to bounce off of while I came down. My parents and friends helped me get to the hospital to begin with when I was just too far gone to understand what was real and what wasn't. My friends visited me in the hospital every day that I was there, and I didn't understand how significant it was at the time. And it really breaks my heart open now to think what a brave reaction that was to something so threatening and new and incomprehensible. Working with Lance saved my life in some ways. Even in the moment, it seemed like there were a lot of different ways it could go from day to day. And working with Lance really helped me stabilize and begin to understand what happened. And the journey of integrating it has been really rewarding. And I love doing this podcast, trying to help give words to what he does, help myself understand it better, and hopefully give some context to other people's experiences, experiences that are just outside the norm. And I wanted to thank Sky. And there's a million different things I could say about Sky, but I'll keep it to two that feel important right now. She always encouraged me to talk about what I went through and made me feel like it's important and valid. And she never brought it up until I was ready. I found out months into dating, after telling her about my experience, that she had always known, and I was floored. She's the most gracious person I've ever met.